For the first time in all of my time creating art, which has essentially been my entire conscious life, I think I have a muse. As an artist, and as many of you probably understand, I've always taken inspiration from essentially anything and anywhere that I am, whether it's nature, food, fashion, film, people, the city I'm living in. I mean, you guys know my relationship with that. Inspiration is generally, at least as an artist, pretty easy to come by. It's very ambient. It exists in passing moments, small or large. It exists in little things you notice and then you move on from. But a muse feels entirely different, at least for me. The difference between something being inspiration and someone becoming your muse are just two very, very different things. The beauty that a muse brings into your creative world and your art, it just attaches itself to you in a way that's so difficult to explain and extremely hard to ignore entirely. But before we get there, I think we should talk about what a muse actually is, for those of you who might not know or might not know some of the historical context around it. So in ancient Greece, muses were not people. They were divine forces, ancient Greek goddesses, specifically 9 goddesses who presided over different forms of knowledge and artistic expression. Poets like Hesiod did not necessarily describe inspiration as something internal or self-generated per se, but rather as something that entered them, something granted by the muses themselves, the goddesses. And to create was not to invent, but rather to be moved or overtaken by something completely outside of the artist. And I think that distinction matters so much when we're comparing inspiration to the concept of a muse, because originally a muse was just not a passive thing. It disrupted this boundary between the artist and the work. It completely blurred that. The artist didn't use a muse to create good work. It was sort of the inverse. The artist is used by the muse. So obviously over time, this concept with the Greek goddesses sort of collapsed into a more human experience, and that's sort of what we experience now, today. The muse became a person, a lover, a subject, someone physically present. But what always remained the same between the experience of the Greek goddess and the human muse was the structure of the experience. Because even when a muse is embodied, the dynamic still feels external, if that makes sense. It still feels like something is happening to the artist rather than something the artist is fully even aware of themselves. And it's just not even something the artist is in control of. I'm thinking about this a lot with myself, and I'll sort of get into that a bit later in the video, but it sort of just overtakes you and you have no say in how it feels to look at someone in such a light. It's really unbelievable. And there's a lot to be said about it. So kind of back to this distinction between inspiration and a muse, because I think that's sort of at the core of a lot of this. Inspiration is something you can move through, right? You can notice it, collect it, set it aside, put it in your notes app. And it's expansive and it can come from many, many different places at once. And there can be overlap. And a lot of times it makes a lot of sense. We take inspiration from the sunset because it's objectively beautiful. The colors are exquisite. The experience of nostalgia and joy and calmness that it sort of puts you into is so easy to define. The feelings that you get when you're looking at a body of water, watching how it moves, watching the sun reflect off of it, the sounds of the water. These are all very clear things that we can sort of define why we're inspired. But a muse is so different. It sort of entirely narrows your vision and alters that definition of beauty. Instead of seeing the water, as something, beautiful, as something that moves delicately, that reflects light, that sounds peaceful, you start to see your muse in these things. I see the water and I think of the way that he holds his cup of coffee in the morning, and and seeing the bridge and the similarities between the inspiration of the world and this person that just moves so beautifully and does things so effortlessly. And it creates this sort of gravitational pull. Your attention just keeps returning to it again and again and again, and you can't help it. To the same face, the same gesture, the same detail you just cannot seem to understand or resolve in the person. And no matter how many times you translate it into your work as an artist, it still never feels fully understood or fully finished and completed. And I think that distinction is it's so important because inspiration is just so observational, where a muse is so incredibly immersive in a way that alters how you show up as an artist in the world. For those of you listening who have experienced having a muse, I would love to hear if you kind of see that distinction between something just being typical inspiration and someone being your muse. On Beauty by Elaine Scarry, I don't know how to say it, but this is a book I've returned to so many times. And she writes that beauty has the power to stop us, to arrest our attention and hold it there. She describes beauty as a kind of radical decentering, where your focus is pulled away from yourself and towards something else entirely. And that feels closest to what a muse actually is for an artist. It's not just something that's like objectively beautiful. Like maybe it's something that other people would not even entirely notice, right? But it's something that recognizes the way that you see the world, which is wow. Like what a gift it is to see the world in somebody else, but also have the way you see the world become even clearer through observing something that is so beautiful, right? Like that's kind of unbelievably beautiful. And this is why like the muse shows up again and again in an artist's work. I mean, I'll go into some examples in a bit, but it's not because the artist is like lacking new ideas, right? But it's because they just can't seem to exhaust what they see in this person, in this thing, right? And often the artist like fixates on a specific feature of their muse, whether it's a movement, a feature, something specifically stands out to them. For me personally, in experiencing having a muse for the first time in my artistic life, there are such small things about this person that I just think are exquisitely, unbelievably beautiful. Maybe others would entirely ignore it or fail to recognize these things completely. But to me, these things are just impossible to miss and have altered the way that I write poetry, the way that I integrate visuals into my work, the way that I interact with the world and how I get my inspiration. It's really unbelievable. And you can see this like Frida Kahlo, for example, particularly in how she paints Diego Rivera over and over and over again. And even when their relationship was painful and even when it was unstable, he remained present in her work, sometimes directly and even sometimes just symbolically. He was so much more than just a subject in her work. He became so embedded in the way that she processed and communicated identity and love and the physical body itself. And another example is Georgia O'Keeffe and her relationship to Alfred. And while he famously photographed O'Keeffe, the influence of the two, it just moved in both directions, which I think is uniquely beautiful. He shaped the conditions of her artistic visibility, but he also became such a emotional and creative anchor in her work. And her paintings, especially her abstractions, they just carry a sense of intimacy and intensity that many art scholars link back to that relationship. And I think what both of these examples share is repetition and return to that the same place, the same feeling. I think it's also really important to point out that the concept of having a muse, we tend to see examples of men lusting after women and even overly sexualizing them. Like when men have a muse that is female, they tend to fixate on their physical body more so than any other feature, where women tend to fixate more on the way that someone moves, their way of thinking, the way the light reflects off of them, like little details like that. And there can be a lot of misogyny linked into the concept of a muse. And honestly, I could do an entire video on that itself. I didn't write too much of that into this script because I'm ultimately talking about my perspective as a female having a muse who happens to be male. I think my experience is entirely different. And I did just want to point that out. The fact that oftentimes this can become dangerous and predatory and really, really not good and not healthy. And we see that come up time and time again. So I did just want to put that caveat in here, not so much to explore it directly in this video, but to say that it is something we need to recognize when having this conversation, and any perspective on that is totally welcome. But it's important that if you do have a muse, this should not be to sexualize or infantilize or idealize someone who does not want to be in that position. That's unfair. For obvious reasons, that is not okay. And again, I just wanted to point that out in this video. I feel like it would be doing a disservice to not mention that having a muse is not always 100% good and healthy and okay. There are cases in which this idea is weaponized to prey upon vulnerable people. So putting that out there and putting a pin in that, and maybe we'll return to that concept in a part 2. In psychoanalytic theory, this kind of fixation can be understood through the idea of the partial object. And this is a concept from Freud. And this is where desire is sort of concentrated onto a specific feature rather than the whole. And then we can sort of expand on this concept through the idea of objet patia, which is the unattainable object of desire that keeps us searching, creating, and repeating. And the muse often becomes just that, and they are completely unaware of it. And they're not fully knowable, they're not fully obtainable, but they are somehow endlessly generative for the artist. And I think that's why the muse just feels so consuming. They don't resolve, yet somehow they just keep offering the artist something new to look at, even when nothing at all has changed. And maybe that's the real difference between a muse and literally everything else that an artist pulls from. Inspiration can be used up, or it runs dry, or it's exhaustive somehow, but that's not the same for a muse. A muse just keeps you on your toes, keeps you seeing beauty so involuntarily. And I think that's what I'm experiencing now, and as an artist experiencing this for the first time is really altering in the face of my work. And my muse exists in my art already. Since the first time I met him, I felt this sense of desire to create in a whole new light. And this is where I want to talk a bit more freely about it. For the first time, I understand what it means for someone to enter your field of vision and just not leave it. It's the way that he exists in small moments, the way he holds things, the way he moves without thinking twice about it, the way the light hits him, the way that his eyes look in the sun. I mean, here's a great example, actually. We went to dinner the other night, and by the way, he's also an artist, and he knows how he is playing into my work. I'm actually working on something right now that I'm probably going to release semi-publicly, at least on my Substack, that has been entirely inspired by this concept and him. And I'll talk about that more as it comes to fruition a bit. We were at dinner and we were in the worst possible spot ever. The way that the sun was setting, it was just shining in both of our eyes. We couldn't escape it. And as annoying as it was, we were trying to look at each other and focus and eat our food. All I could see was the way that the sun was just entering his eyes and reflecting this unbelievable, ambery golden brown. And I couldn't shut up about it, to be honest with you. I was like, wow, I've seen this color a million times. I've seen it in the sunset. I've seen it reflect back in the water. It's literally here behind me with this lamp. And somehow when I see it in your eyes, I see it so clearly, and I see it like I'm seeing it for the first time. And that's so cool to have that experience through somebody else. And I'm not sure if anyone would notice the way that I do. And I at the same time, I just can't seem to look away. And I think it's just so interesting to me, this concept of beauty. Beauty is a philosophical conversation that I could have forever, because I think there are so many avenues that can become dangerous and problematic when we're talking about aesthetics and beauty standards, and what we define as beautiful, and how we treat others differently based upon their physical presentation. And that can start to blur into misogyny and racism and misogynoir. And all of these terrible things can stem from the way that we integrate our ideals around beauty into the people around us. And beauty has such a unbelievably complex social contract that a lot of people get to live blissfully unaware of. And so I think that this is all something we've got to be aware of when we talk about beauty. But also, I think this video is just to, for once, let myself experience the joy of finding something so beautiful and allowing myself to tap into it and see the good in all that beauty can be, and try to find it in other places, and just explore it and feel it and let my eyes take it in. Because I'm so hypercritical of so many things in the world, as I'm sure a lot of you are too. And it's easy for me to see the downsides of things, but I think for right now, I just want to sit in the joy and the creativity and the spark that I've experienced since finding a muse and defining that and letting it translate into my work. So I don't know. Those are my thoughts. I hope that this was interesting, introspective in some sort of way for you. If you've had experience with this and you have thoughts, I would love to hear them in the comments. And thank you for listening to me ramble on about this. I hope you guys have such a beautiful day. I cannot wait to talk to you again in my next video. And with love always, I will see you so very soon. Don't forget to subscribe. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. And I will see you in my next video. Bye, guys.